idea how things work. They think they do.
Well, this is really kind of sad, because I was back in year 2000. I was really on a mission to see Microsoft being brought down by open source. It looks like it's going to bring itself down now.
Yeah.
Much to my disappointment. It's just going to wither and die all by itself instead of a glorious, explosive death. Nope. Open source didn't have to do a single thing. It's like, oh, we haven't even started to do anything. We haven't penetrated the desktop market at all. And it brought itself down. It's like, wow, Steve, you're doing a very good job.
If Google would really put some more resources towards its Chrome OS, it could probably.
Google doesn't really care.
I know they don't.
Google doesn't care, what platform you run. They just want they just want to get through your data and give you ads, right? You can run Microsoft, you can run Mac OS 10, iOS. It doesn't matter.
Sadly, it's true.
All right, so we're going to start today's lecture with the solution of the steering wheel thing, okay? Because, a lot of people are asking me, how do we get the steering wheel to lock, once it rotates, to a certain degree and not rotate any further, okay? So I'm going to show you guys the code that I wrote for that purpose, and that will basically start our discussion here. All right. So we have let's see, I think it's over here. There we go. Okay, so this is the event that we are looking at, which is our direct event for the steering wheel. You can put it here, you can put it, the sprite itself can have its own event handler. Either way will work just fine. But what is different is this part here. So if you look at the first thing it does, the conditional statement is not that important, okay? If you look at the overall conditional statement, it's just saying that, if I'm not dragging inside, if I'm not dragging the sprite, don't do anything, okay? That's basically what it is. But the first thing I do is to look at a delta angle, okay? So that's the first block here, the highlighted part is the first block. So the first thing I do is to calculate or measure a delta. Basically, it's measuring, how far have I moved angularly the steering wheel, or how far am I attempting to move the steering wheel compared to last time. Okay, the position compared to last time. And the code is basically two arctangents. One arctangent 2 is using the current location, so we have current x2 and current y2 here. And then the second one, what it is subtracting, is based on the previous x1 and the previous y2. Excuse me, previous x2 and previous y2, which are reflecting the previous location. Okay, so when you look at the program, what it's really doing is, let's say this is your steering wheel, okay? And this is the last point. This is the previous location. And let's say this is the current location. Okay, so we have previous here and current here. What this code is doing is trying to find the arctangent for this guy, trying to find the arctangent for this guy here, and they're both measured from horizontal axis pointing to the right-hand side. And what it's doing is trying to measure this angle, and this angle is measured in this direction. Are there any questions about this part?
That's the delta.
That's the delta. So we have delta here. Is that how you write delta? How do you write delta?
Oh, it's a circle with a line through it?
A circle with a line through it.
That's theta.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Delta is a triangle.
Yeah, delta is a triangle.
Well,
Delta,
triangle is the uppercase.
Yeah.
What about the lowercase?
It's half of the symbol. Say section something. It's half of the section sign.
Half a section.
I'll look it up, tag.
Okay. Well, this is the delta, which is our delta angle, and now this is
Almost
useful.
like an 8.
Oh, okay. I see.
Yeah, say
Thank
half
you.
of the section sign.
Okay. That. Okay. Thank you. So that's our delta, and our delta is calculated this way. Now the next thing it's going to do is it will try to look at the delta angle and see whether it is unusually large, like less than negative 180 degrees or more than 180 degrees. The only time that can happen is when you really flick the steering wheel really fast or it's crossing the boundary. Okay? When it crosses the boundary, that can happen too. There are two ways to cross the boundary to make it happen. Now, this really comes in handy if you have already taken cisp362, the assembly programming class, because it's exactly the same kind of thing when you cross over the boundary of the limitations of a 16-bit or 32-bit integer. Except in this case, it's 180. Okay, so there are two crossover boundaries that can happen. One is to cross over the boundary from here to here. Okay, so what's going to happen in this case? This angle here, the first angle, which is here, this is about 180 degrees. Okay, what is the other angle? It's negative 180 degrees, 170 or so. Okay, good, but it's right about 180 or negative 180. 180 degrees and negative 180 degrees are exactly the same thing. Okay, because they're both pointing in the opposite direction to the 0 degrees. So when you look at it this way, what is the delta? Delta is negative 180 minus 170 minus 170. So in this case, the delta is going to be about 340 degrees. Negative 340. Am I making any sense here? If just subtracting, this is the current, this is the previous. I'm subtracting the previous from the current. So I'm subtracting 170 from negative 170, which will give me a value that is negative 360, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because this is measured in this direction. That is negative 340 degrees, because negative means I'm measuring in clockwise, and it's basically going through almost one full revolution. Am I making any sense so far? That's how the arctangent is going to report, but it doesn't make any sense. The other way to create a really huge delta is to do exactly the opposite, like this. Okay, so the top point becomes my current, and the lower one becomes my previous. So this time I'm going from negative 170 degrees to positive 170 degrees. So when you look at the delta, in this case, the delta is 340 degrees because it is 170 minus negative 170. So in both cases, the reported number as delta is completely off because I crossed over that boundary, which is from positive 180 to negative 180. Okay, are we still doing okay so far in terms of the math? Okay, so in this case, it's measuring the delta in the opposite direction, like that, because the positive rotation is counterclockwise. So in this case, it's measuring counterclockwise 340 degrees. Now, is it possible that you actually flick the steering wheel that fast? Yes, it is possible. Is it likely? Probably not. Okay, because you have to do this within 100 milliseconds. That thing is getting updated every. Well, actually, I'm not sure how fast it's sampling the drag, but I think it's faster than every 100 milliseconds. Okay, so it's unlikely. So what do? Well, basically what you say is, when I see a value that is too big to be considered, I would go the other direction. So instead of reporting this as negative 340 degrees, I would use 360 degrees to add to the delta amount. So in this case, it will give me back just exactly 20 degrees, which is from here to here. Are we doing okay so far? So I check for the special condition, and then I compute the actual delta. So the new delta becomes just 20 degrees. In the other case, it's almost the same except it's flipped. Okay, so in this case, the new delta is going to be the computed delta, which is 340 degrees, minus 360 degrees. So in this case, it will give me negative 20 degrees, which makes more sense, right? Because if at one point the drag point is here, and then the next time you see the drag point, it is over here. It is very unlikely that you have flicked through like this. Instead, it's more likely that you're just dragging it like that. Okay, and that's what this logic here is doing. Exactly the same thing. It will do the delta angle, compute the delta angle, just based on arctangent. But because of the way it encodes the angle, it can cross over the positive 180 degrees to negative 180 degrees because it's a boundary. And when it crosses over the boundary, in one case the delta angle is going to be very negative. In other words, it's going to be less than negative 180 degrees. So in that case, which is on the whiteboard, that would be the first case. Okay, so in that case, I'm just adding 360 degrees to the delta. That doesn't seem right to me, because it's already a huge negative number, and I'm subtracting delta to it from it. I should be adding, right? So this one is actually wrong. Okay. That should be adding instead of subtracting. There we go. I'm just gonna connect to the device so we can actually see it run. And then in the second case, it is greater than 180 degrees. So that would correspond to but I might be making a mistake here. If it's greater than 180 degrees, it corresponds to the bottom case, and in that case I subtract 360 from it, so that part is correct. But in either case, I have a delta angle that is corrected based on that. So we still doing okay so far in terms of how we compute the delta angle when it crosses over the 180 degrees boundary. Sort of, kind of. Okay. Now, once we have a delta, then the next conditional statement is this one here. It's testing to see whether the heading of the steering wheel is going to still be within the range of negative 180 to positive 180 after we add the delta to it. So it's not done yet. If it is within that range, then I'll go ahead and add the delta angle to the heading direction. Otherwise, I'm changing the initial angle. The initial angle was originally registered when you first click on the steering wheel. Okay, so I'm basically imagining that the steering wheel has already locked, and then you're just sliding your hand on the steering wheel. Because the steering wheel cannot rotate anymore, so if you try to rotate it some more, you're just sliding your hand on the steering wheel. Okay, so let's go ahead and see whether this code works or not. Okay, because I can tell because I can change. Okay, let me just get rid of this one here. Instead, I'll report the current angle. So I'm gonna take this guy, put it here. Instead of looking at the delta angle, I'll be looking at the heading of the steering wheel. So we look at image sprite steering, and then we'll take a look at the heading property of this. And here we go. Switch to the emulator. I turn off the little ball here because it's actually consuming a little bit of resources too. So we'll go ahead and steer it, and it goes all the way here, and then it locks. I'm still dragging. So it locks, but as soon as I rotate the other way around, it unlocks it. But at this point, it locks again. So any further rotation is like sliding my hand on the steering wheel until I turn it in the opposite direction. Then it turns again, and then at this point it locks again. But if I continue to drag it some more, it's just sliding my hand on the steering wheel. So now the steering wheel itself is limiting itself to plus 180 degrees to about negative 180 degrees. So your car or your little sprite only has to correspond to a ratio of the heading of the steering wheel every time you update it. Any questions about this?
Why does it lock?
Huh?
Why does it lock?
Why is it locked?
Yeah, why does it lock when you turn one around?
As in how the program is implemented or
Graphic.
the graphics? Because I put a conditional statement saying that if the angle is going to be more than 180 or when it's going to be less than negative 180 degrees, do not make any changes. Instead, change the initial angle instead. So are we doing okay so far with this code? Yep.
My only issue when doing this is that I was trying to, because you said you wanted to work like a real car. Well, in a real car, the ratio is like 2.25 turns to 1 as far as turning. So you can turn the steering wheel
End to end, right?
Yeah, 2.25 turns before it locks.
Right.
And then that ratio is to the wheel. So I was trying to figure out how did we make that ratio happen.
Oh.
Yeah. So when I did it, like I got really close to making that ratio happen. Where it only turned so far, and then it stopped.
Okay.
Was maybe in the instructions for the future you could put that you want it to not turn more than 180 degrees in either direction.
Ah.
So,
Okay.
Because it's far more difficult to implement a ratio of turns than it is to just that ratio.
Yep. All right. But that's the logic to do it. I mean, you basically I just figure out the delta first, handle the special case when it crosses over the boundary, and then the second conditional statement takes a look at what if I add that delta angle to the heading. If that is going to exceed the limit, then don't do it, and just change the initial angle instead. If it is not going to exceed, then go ahead and change the actual heading of the steering wheel. The rest is pretty easy. You just set up a timer, update the actual heading of the car sprite every 100 milliseconds based on the heading of the steering wheel divided by 6, and that's it. That's how you update the heading of the little car. Yep. Any questions about this one? No questions. And this is basically the last project we'll still do using App Inventor 1, and after this we'll be using App Inventor 2. So are there any questions about how to use lists, particularly list of pairs in an application? No questions about that? All right. So if there are no questions about that, what I'll do is I'm going to review all the concepts that we have done up to this point, and also start to introduce the concept of arrays, because if you're taking cisp362, this is about the time when they will start to talk about arrays. So we'll do a little bit about arrays, and then we'll basically say what kind of project. We're about 1/2 through the entire semester, so this is a good time to get started with your actual project and incorporate the concepts that we have talked about so far into your project. Okay, so here we go. And what I'll do is I'm going to unhide this topic here. I'm going to add another assignment. So I'll be working on the assignment, at the same time when I go over the topics, because that's basically what I want to do. So I want you to revise your project proposal to basically include the different features that we have talked about in this class, so that you can start to actually go ahead and implement your program. So that's what we'll do today. Here we go. All right. Okay, the first thing we want to do is to specify the criteria for project. Okay, first thing is I really want everybody to use App Inventor 2 instead of App Inventor 1. If you have a particular need to use App Inventor 1 instead of App Inventor 2, let me know and see if I can, work out, the problem areas, where, App Inventor 2 doesn't work as well. Okay, so I'll just write down here, preferably using. Okay, I cannot spell. Using App Inventor 2 instead of App Inventor 1. Okay. The only problem I can see with App Inventor 2 is it doesn't work well with an emulator. So for people without an actual device, App Inventor 2 is a little bit troublesome. You have to kind of go through, some extra stuff to get it to work. But if you can see it here, I have, I have the emulator. Oh, I just closed it. But when I had the, no, I still have it here. I just have to close the blocks editor from App Inventor 1. Now I can go through a command line command to get to it. Okay, so I can go through a command line here. Just locate the folder where I have App Inventor installed, and just run ADB from here. Then I can go ahead and just install. In fact, I can just list the devices first. It's already listed here, and I can just do everything from here. It's not as convenient, but at the same time, once you set up the infrastructure, it's not that much more trouble either. Okay. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is what kind of design elements I want you to include in your project. Okay. So we want to look at design. So these are the graphical user interface components. Okay, I think it is not unreasonable to expect your app to have buttons on it. Okay, so buttons are basically the easiest user interfaces. You push it, it triggers an event. It's not really difficult to deal with. I can probably expect labels too, which is you can just use the label as a static text, or you can also update it to reflect some kind of a status if you want to. So I'm just going to kind of list here, how you can use a label. Okay, you can use a label to display static text information, or you can also update it to reflect information that is computed or acquired otherwise. Okay, so if your app is going to interface with a database through a website, you can also use that to update a label, and say, oh, okay, I'm just getting new information from the website, and here's the new data. Are there any questions at this point? Yep, go ahead.
What if we already started our app? Project?
How far are you along? Pretty far.
Basically, most of the aesthetic stuff like that.
I think the static stuff you can actually import
aesthetic,
it.
like just the screen.
Just the screen.
Yeah.
I think you tried it out, and you can
all
actually.
the screen elements it was able to port over as long as you change the extension from zip to AIA, but all the blocks of code just disappeared.
So if you don't have a lot of logic specified, then you're not losing a lot.
Okay.
On the other hand, if you have a lot of blocks already specified, if you have a lot of code already written, then it's going to be a kind of painful process to kind of copy everything over to the other side. Yep. So you might, if you really have a lot of code already written, then you can just keep using App Inventor 1. Okay. Any other type of graphical user interface that we have already talked about in this class? Do you guys recall anything else? How about just the one that we have that we just looked at earlier?
Sprites.
Sprites and Canvas. Okay. So Sprites and Canvas are optional. So you don't have to include it because not all applications actually require the use of user graphics, because you can use a canvas to basically draw anything you want. I mean, you can draw your own buttons if you want to. So I can look at this one and say, yeah, well, that's kind of optional. We don't need to use that. What else have we talked about in this class or used in this class? There are certain things that are actually pretty easy or intuitive to use. I'm just going to switch back to here.
Lists.
Okay, list, but they are not user interfaces, so we'll talk about that next. What else? Checkboxes, right? I mean, we talked about checkboxes. Go ahead.
Sliders.
Sliders, okay. So what I'll do is I'm gonna make these, optional, but you have to pick one of the optional ones, okay? So this is what I'll do it. Okay, optional ones. Pick two. Okay, pick two from this list. But you can pick, any two, which means you can pick, sprites and canvas. You can pick check boxes. You can pick, what else? Image. I mean, that's really just just a picture, right? List picker. I think we talked about list pickers already too. List picker. Text box. Slider. Okay. Well, I'll pick. I'll use these as optional ones. Just pick two from the list. I'm grouping sprites and canvas as a single one, because those two you cannot have a sprite without a canvas. So that's why I group those two, as one. They're also more, kind of more sophisticated. I mean, if you look at a checkbox, how complicated is it? Not very complicated, right? But it's still, an extra element, on top of, just a label and a button. Text boxes. They're really useful for inputting text information. Sliders are useful for specifying a value, because instead of having someone to type in the value, you can just slide a slider. It's just more intuitive that way. You don't also have to check for ranges, because when you get a value from a slider, they have to be within the range that you specify. So that's the other advantage of using a slider. All right. Organizational elements or components, use at least one. Okay, so those three are basically, if you go to screen arrangement, we have horizontal arrangement, table arrangement, and vertical arrangement. So your application needs to use at least one of these three. Well, I think that pretty much covers the graphical user interface elements. It doesn't mean that you cannot use any more. I mean, if your application calls for more than just whatever I list here, go ahead and use that. Question? Yeah. Okay. I'll just make I'll just say that two screens here. Okay. So you can use two screens, for whatever purpose. One can be a help screen, so it doesn't even do anything. So you can have two screens, but there's one requirement here, okay? One screen has to be able to return to the first, okay? Prior. I'm not requiring you to return any information. It's just that your one screen has to be able to go back to the previous one. If you kind of pay attention to my last lecture on last Wednesday, you will know that there's not much to do about that. All right, so I think that covers most of the design issues, and these are the minimum. Okay, I'm expecting these are the minimums. In terms of program code, okay. Here we have a little bit more stuff here, okay? I want you guys to use the concept of a list. You can choose how to use it. Okay, I think there are many different ways to use a list in this class. You can use it to pass information from one part to the other part. You can also use it to as a list of pairs. Okay, so that can easily expand what kind of data you can represent in your app. Okay. Are there any questions about how to use lists? Okay, any questions? Control structure. Okay, control structure means conditional statements or loops. Those are what we call control structures. So let me just kind of outline here. Okay. One of the following. Okay. So you have to have at least one conditional statement. If then else, or some kind of a loop. Okay. If you decide to use lists, it's pretty easy to include control structures, because you have you can have conditional statements. You can also have a list, a for loop to go through each and every element in the array or in the list. So that's really not difficult to incorporate in terms of control structures. Okay. And let's see here. Let's go back to here, and then we'll take a look at blocks. Okay, so if you click control, that's basically what it is. You have just the fact that you have to open another screen means you have to do something here too. Logic, I don't think I'm going to require any specific logic thing. If you use a loop or conditional statement, more likely than not you're going to use something in logic already. Math, I'm not going to require you guys to do any particular math. It depends on the application. Some applications may not need to do math at all. Text, you probably have to deal with text just to make your application useful. List is here. Colors, variables. I do not want to require the use of local variables, but I do want to emphasize the importance of using local variables. Okay. One of the things about App Inventor 1 that I think is a very big limitation is they don't have local variables. Okay, let's take a look at the application that we just looked at a little bit earlier. I just closed the screen already. But that one, the delta angle, do I need to store delta angle other than inside the event handle when I try to calculate the actual amount of angular movement that I have performed? Is that a variable that I need to keep track of between events or only within a event? Sorry? Only within an event, exactly. So that's not something that I have to store as a global variable. But in App Inventor 1, I don't have an option. I don't have local variables. So I have to define delta as a global variable, which is not really the best way of using it, of using global variables. And that's why I like people to use App Inventor 2 and basically get used to the concept of local variables instead of using global variables. Whenever you can use a variable as a local one, use it as a local one. Only use global variables when you need to track something between events. But if something only needs to be tracked within an event handler, you really should use a local variable instead. Are there any questions about local variables versus global variables? Go ahead.
In one, you don't have local variables.
In App Inventor 1, there's no local variables. You cannot define or use local variables. That concept does not exist in App Inventor 1. So as a programming element, it doesn't exist in App Inventor 1, which I think is a very big and important omission in App Inventor. Any questions? No questions? All right. So the program code, I'm not gonna make this list really too extensive. Nothing like you have to go through a list or anything that specific. I do want you guys to use TinyDB. Okay. Now, what you want to store in your TinyDB is entirely up to you. Okay. You can store a single little thing that affects, like a configuration type of value, or like my app here, you can actually store quite a bit more in your TinyDB. But you have to use TinyDB to store something. Okay. So use TinyDB to store app specific data. Can be configuration data, can be app related data. It's entirely up to you how you want to use your TinyDB or how to fulfill this requirement of your app. All right. Are there any questions?
What is configuration data?
Configuration data would be like font size. Okay, if you want to let the user choose a different font, you can remember the font size here. So every time you load your app, you basically say, oh, okay, let me see if there's something from the TinyDB. If there is a font size entry in your TinyDB, then you set the font size of all your text boxes and whatnot to the font size.
I think it can be or can't be.
Can be. Yeah, it's up to you to choose how you want to use it. Okay, so for someone who wants to do the minimum, they can just store the background color of the screen, right? I mean, that's one single thing you put into a TinyDB. So every time you initialize the main screen, you read it back, you change the background of the main screen, and you're done. But that also means you have to have a way to change or to set the background color of the screen, so you need some control to do it, like an option, somewhere, on your screen to say, okay, let's change the default, background color of the screen. All right. So, any questions at this point? Nope. Okay. All right. So at this point, what I'll do also is to have you guys to basically restate, several things about your app. Okay, so I want you to restate the following of your app. I'm going to pick a heading 2 here. It's just a repetition of something that you have done before, but this time because we have already talked about all the different types of programming elements, you have a much better idea of what you can do at this point. So I want you to basically restate the following. The first one is going to be the purpose of your app, and this is basically the use case diagram. In other words, you want to explain to me why would someone want to download and install your app. That really is the bottom line. What is it going to do to the end user? Why would someone want to download and use your computer? What is that person going to use your app for? Not how. Okay, you can basically say, well, they want to download this app because it can do all these things, but I don't know how to implement it. Okay, the how is a separate issue. I just want to know why they want to download your app. We doing okay so far? Okay. And then the second thing is how would you evaluate whether your app is successful? Okay, so basically you are going to come up with your own rubric and say, well, I guess my app is successful if someone can download the app and actually get these things done effectively. So it's really related to the first question, okay? But I need a way so that you can tell me how I'm going to test your app to see whether it is actually doing what it is supposed to or not. Am I doing okay so far? Okay. And that's it. This is it for your project proposal 2. Basically you have to incorporate all these elements. I don't want you to tell me exactly right now, okay, I'm going to use 2 buttons, 1 label, 1 canvas with 2 sprites inside and so on, because it's going to change anyway. I just want to give you a laundry list of things that I want you to include in your app. You can just basically say, well, I think here we can use this particular element, here we can use that particular element, and so on. And that's it. I'm going to save this document as your homework assignment. Let's make it due in a week, okay? So it's going to do next week at this time, right before this class starts. And I'm going to make it, that will be the deadline as well. Grace period of 15 minutes is fine. This is going to be online text. You don't have to turn in any files, okay? So this will give you an editor box, where you can just keep editing. Just remember to submit, so otherwise you won't, you can lose your changes if you don't hit the submit button. Feedback, I'm gonna give you some feedback comment here. Submission option. Turn off notification. I don't need all those email. And let's put 20 points to this one. And that's it. Here we go. Okay, so do you guys have a better idea now, what to do with your project? How many of you think that you might have hit most, if not all of the requirements already? I mean, most apps probably use a lot more than what I'm asking for here. Okay. How many people think that you might want to change your original plan because now you know more about how to write an app, so you can actually include more features in your app now? Okay, very good. That's good to know. How many people think that you might need to decrease the number of features because you still haven't figured out how to do certain things with your app, which is fine. I mean, some people just have ambitious plans to begin with, so now it's time to kind of scale it back a little bit just to make it feasible. Okay. Any other questions? What about the web component? It's optional. Okay, if you guys want to do it, it's good, but it's kind of difficult in a way because you need to control the other side as well. You need to know something about web scripting to do it, and web scripting is not a prerequisite to this class, so I cannot make that assumption. I just think it's a good thing to try. It's a very useful component of app programming, but in this class, I'm not gonna make it a requirement to do that. Any other questions?
What would be a web component?
A web component?
Yeah. File option today?
The web component is, if you go to the designer, you can go to other stuff, and here's the web component. Okay, you can also click the help button here, and it will bring you to the help screen of the web component. It basically is a component that gives you a way to interact with a website. Okay, you can query a website, you can send something to a website to update, let's say a database remotely, or you can also get data back from a website. So it turns your app into a miniature browser, so to speak. We talked about this also when we talked about this when we were still using App Inventor 1, but I don't think App Inventor 2 has changed anything about the web component.
Would that downloaded picture of the cat be a web component?
No, because that's not done by your app itself. It's done by your PC running the integrated development environment. So that doesn't count. But in this case, if you use the web component, it allows your app to actually go to certain places on the internet to basically download web pages or send queries to other websites, so you can update the database, you can retrieve information from a database, and so on. Okay, so this part is definitely optional, but it's we did talk about this a little bit, and I think it's an interesting concept. I think it's really useful, but I'm not going to make it a requirement for your project. The TinyDB one is a requirement because I think that one is just really easy to incorporate into just about any application. All right, any questions? No questions? Okay. If there are no questions, yes.
Will you ever demonstrate for this, any of this for the class?
I did already.
Okay, when?
I cannot remember.
Okay.
That's why it's all recorded.
It was on a Monday or Wednesday.
Very good. I cannot remember which day. I mean, that's why it's all recorded and uploaded to YouTube, so I don't have to worry about it. You guys can make an index of the topics on each day. Make that an app.
How do you make your playlists?
Hmm?
You used to do playlists.
I don't need playlist anymore because in the past I needed to use playlist because I only had 15 minutes per clip, so I have to chop each recording down to bits and then link them together, and I can upload up to 3-4 hours now, so it's not an
Would it
issue.
be possible to request that you make playlists of the class? For instance, like do fall 2013 362 and then all the videos for that semester.
They're all titled
Yeah, they're all tagged by 362, so I think it's not hard to locate them.
You just search your channel by the class name,
Yeah, let me give it a try first.
sort by date.
Okay, maybe not videos, just video.
That request is definitely not for me because I understand how to search YouTube. It's more for people who may or may not understand how to search YouTube.
That's okay. I just want to show people how to do it. You go to the videos tab and then you click the magnifying glass for search. So you're searching within my channel for cisp362, and the result will be all the clips with the titles with cisp362 in it. So that's a quick and easy way to locate all of the recordings related to this class instead of a combination of all my other classes.
And you're the only one that's going to come up under that?
Sorry?
You're the only teacher that's going to come up under that? CISP 362?
Yeah, I really doubt Folsom Lake is doing it.
So that's only California that labels their class that?
Well, this is also within my channel. So this is searching within my channel, so that means even if there are like 20 other colleges teaching CISP 362, you won't find the other ones because it's limited to my channel. Unless they hack into my channel and upload stuff as CISP 362, that would be a different issue. All right. Let's take a look at some of the other components. Activity starter, I'm not gonna require that. It's interesting because okay, let me just kind of right click on this one and then give you guys an idea of what it is. Activity starter is a component that can launch another activity from your application. Now that can be very useful because if you want to start, let's say Google Maps, okay, because your application it wants to display a certain location, you can do that, okay. So this one allows you to start another app inventor, or for Android app, it can also start just about anything. What you really need to know is to know how that app is called officially. This would be the name that you need to know in order to get that application started. Okay. Once again, this is an optional feature. I do not require you to use this particular feature. But for those of you who want to display locations or want to go to a particular web page, for instance, for help and for other types of additional information, this is a great way to do it. Okay, if you already own a website and your app, just needs a little help screen, instead of putting the help screen as a part of your app, you can just start a web browser and point the browser to the help screen that you have already uploaded to your website. So that would be a pretty cool way to do it. It's easy. You don't have to deal with rendering the web pages and stuff like that. It just goes there, starts up a new web browser for that purpose. For those of you who like Lego Mindstorms, I don't know how many of you have purchased a Lego Mindstorms. You can also include Lego Mindstorm stuff. I would be more than happy to look at applications, great applications that interact with Lego Mindstorms kit. Okay, how many people have a Lego Mindstorms kit or have access to one? Nobody. Okay, well so that's that's definitely optional.
Most of the stuff on a college student sub and not a professor's income.
Well, you guys have taken enough classes from me, so the savings from not having to buy textbooks, would definitely be more than enough to afford one Lego Mindstorms kit. Well, some of you anyway. Some of you maybe the first semester taking my classes, so you need to take a few more to save enough money. It's like sometimes my wife would tell me, she's going shopping because she's saving money. The more I shop, the more I'm saving. I'm just kidding. She's actually very frugal, but some of her colleagues would do that. They would go to Macy's, in the afternoon, like during lunch hour, because they all work in downtown Sacramento. So every lunch hour, they would go to Macy's and say, I'm going to make some more money because I'm, saving more money. I'm going through all the, clearance racks and whatnot, and she has one colleague, whose home is more like a Macy's outlet store. Because she just buys everything that is clearance on the clearance rack and on sale. But that's how other people use their money is entirely other people's business. Okay, so looking at sensors, this is also something that you might want to consider using. I'm not going to make this a requirement because you cannot easily do this with an emulator. So for people without an actual Android device, it will be kind of hard to incorporate location sensor or an accelerometer. On the other hand, if you are using an actual Android device, these can be very interesting. They can give you your application, a new dimension of interaction, ability. Okay, there are many apps, that can sense, whether you're shaking it or not, and if you're shaking your phone or holding it upside down or flipping it, it will do certain things. So you might want to incorporate this if you think, hey, I want to make my app a little bit, fun to use.
Make an etch a sketch.
Like that. Actually, you know what? Now that you know how the steering wheel works, it's not inconceivable to make an etch and sketch app, because you just have the two dials and to control the X and Y of a little dot. Using a canvas, you can now draw lines and stuff like that, and then you can use the accelerometer to make sure it's upside down first before it's shaken in order to erase it.
Are you going to upload the completed app of the drive?
Absolutely, I can upload it now. So let me do it right now.
Because you could essentially take the blocks from that one.
Absolutely,
And the
you
blocks
can.
from the
You can. You guys can share the code. Yep. So I'm gonna download the source, drive 3, and then go to the community gallery. Log in as myself. Okay. Which one? I'm gonna log in as Dr. Tag 2013 fall. And I want to upload
My apps.
my apps. Oh, this is the new one. That's the new one. Is there only one gallery for both versions?
Looks like it.
It looks like it because the URL doesn't say, alpha.
I would assume so, because you're not actually putting it in a or building upon it. You're just
Right.
you're displaying it.
Yeah, but it does allow people to download the code. So when they download
then
the
they
code,
use that for the proper version.
When you upload it and you try to download that source code,
Mhm.
it's easy for App Emitter 2, it's AIA.
Okay,
Prevent
that's interesting. Because I was hoping that I can use this as a loophole to upload it in version 1 and then download it as version 2. Apparently that doesn't work. Alright, fine. Okay, this is drive 3. Drive a RC car. Unfinished. So I'm gonna list it under education. I'm just adding the tag as drive 3 so you guys can find it easily. Specify source file, drive 3, and I just selected image. Darn it. Alright. I guess I can still run, just go ahead and run it. I can just, yeah. Okay, I know what to do. Snapshot, select the region. There you go. There you go. You should be able to find it now. All right. So this way, you know, you can use the mechanism of the steering wheel, you know, as a knob. The limitation, on the other hand, is you can only control one knob at a time. Okay, it doesn't give you, like, even though your screen may have multi-touch, you cannot, like, you know, do a DJ thing with, you know, 2 different wheels at the same time. You know, so you can only control one wheel at a time using App Inventor. So that's kind of a limitation, but you know, it's not too bad.
So App Inventor doesn't support multi-touch.
No, I don't think so. You know, because it's one layer on top of Android, so it has already filtered out, you know, some of the events already. So multi-touch is probably filtered out. All right. So has anyone considered using sensors from your phone? Okay, multiple people, multiple projects, very good. Okay. Social, you know, I don't think that's going to be, you know, a big deal. Okay, you know, unless you want to deal with texting. I know, you know, you want to, you know, write an app to automatically return the texting. Did you get it to work? No.
I pretty much did write the app, but I never got it to work, so
Okay.
I got discouraged.
Okay.
Maybe it was a bug, I don't know.
I think it could be a security setting too. Maybe there's an obscure security setting
What
that
was
is
the question?
preventing it. He was trying to write an app to use, you know, texting. You know, so texting looks like this. A component that will, when the send message method is called, the send a text message specified, and then the receive enable will allow you to set to. Basically, your app can start to run, or it will get triggered when you receive a text message when the app is active.
Well, the permissions when you install the App Inventor companion are automatically allowed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you couldn't get it to work.
Yeah, when I would receive a text, it just wouldn't do anything.
Maybe you have another program that has higher priority.
That's intercepting already.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I have any program that listens for incoming text though.
I know, like Verizon has like 1 or 2 programs that have like nearly highest level for receiving text message.
So it never got to your app, basically. Because each program that wants to deal with your text message can register with Android and say, okay, when there's a text message received, let me know. Now, it depends on whether Android can daisy chain that, because if Android can basically say, okay, I've just received a text message and notify multiple applications at the same time, including your app, then your app should be getting it. On the other hand, if it's not capable of sending notifications to multiple apps that there's a new text coming in, then whoever has the highest priority, or whoever registered with Android first to say I'm the one responsible to receive text messages, then if your app is the second in line, then you won't get anything.
So
Because
that's like having your stock default text messaging app and downloading an aftermarket one and setting.
say again.
It's like having your default texting app that comes on its own, and you
Right.
download an aftermarket.
You can usually disable it too. If you go to the app settings and then applications, you can see what processes or what programs are running, and you might see you might recognize the name of one as the one that is intercepting text. But the problem is that same program may not be just intercepting text messages. It can be doing other things too. So that's why this may be a little bit tricky to get it to work, because if you get it to work, you might have to disable certain things on your phone.
So it's
But
a
that
little different.
yeah. It doesn't seem to make sense to me that it would have the ability to notify multiple apps that a text has been received, because they all want to do different things. So it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. Okay, so under media, okay, we have other things that are completely optional. We have sound. Okay, your very first program, Hello Pearl, uses sound. Okay, it plays a clip of a cat meowing. You have image picker. I think that can be useful too. A special purpose button, when the user taps on the image picker, the device image gallery appears, and so on. So that can be useful for certain types of apps depending on what you're working on. Camera can be useful because if you look at it, you can take a picture, and your app can get the file name of the image. So that can be helpful if you want to just take a log. I have thought about making an app to catch people parking without the proper permit. So the app would basically just let you take a picture of the license plate of the car that is parked at the wrong place without the proper permit, and then it will send an email to campus police. Now, if you have GPS enabled in your camera, then campus police can just look at the location tag of your image file, and they know where the car is, and then they can just send whoever is closest to that location to issue a ticket. So that's one use of the camera component if you want to. You can also use a camcorder if you want to. Camcorder basically records a video, and once again you get the name of the file once you're done with recording the video. All right. So these are all optional. I just want to remind people what type of features are available at your disposal. Within other stuff, we have a bunch of stuff that some of these we have used quite a bit already, like activities, not activity starter, but notifier. We have used that already. I personally have not used a speech recognizer component for using speech recognizer to convert speech to text. And let's take a look at this one. Result: the last text produced by the recognizer. Events: after getting text, before getting text. Methods: get text. Ask the user to speak and convert the speech to text. Signals the after get text event when the result is available. That can be interesting. I mean, for some apps. All right. And not ready for prime time, we have sound recorder, so that can be helpful too. All right. So are there any questions about your project? No questions? All right. If there are no questions, the only remaining topic I'm going to go over, is basically related to list, but this time we are looking at a list as an array. Okay, so this way, we can just go ahead and, go through that topic, and you can incorporate the concept of an array in your application. Okay, let's go ahead and start a new project to do that. So I'm starting a new project called Array Demonstration. And And what an array is it's basically like a box. And so if I'm going to draw a picture of an array, this class is assuming that you have either taken P300 or currently taking P300, P370, or one of the programming classes. And about this time, I think arrays should be the topic. So that's why I'm going to include the concept of an array. When we use variables, whether it's a local variable or a global variable, it is a single thing. It can only store a single value. So you can look at a global variable or a local variable as a coffee mug. Okay, so let's call this variable x. Variable x can have any content, but it can only store one thing. Okay, it can store a number. It can store some text information. It can be a Boolean, which means it can either be true or false. Okay. Well, in this class, because we're using a scripting language, it can also be a list. Okay. But when we look at x as a list, it's not really a coffee mug anymore. Instead, it is a box. Okay, because it's now a container. So when x is a list, it is actually more like a box because it is a container. Now within a container, now we can have other things within the container. When you look at x as a container, as an array, now we can have multiple coffee mugs inside this one single box here. Except the coffee mugs inside, they're not named anymore. Instead, they're numbered. In this class, because we're using app inventor, the numbers start with 1. So this is 1, 2, 3, and so on. Are we doing okay so far? Okay. So the way you get to a particular item inside an array, which is just basically a list, is to use under the list folder here, under the list drawer here, the call that you use is called select list item. Okay, so that's how you select a particular item from a list. The first one is the list itself, or in this case, we use it as an array. And then the second item is a number to designate exactly which one you want to use. Are we doing okay so far? Now, one thing I have not tried yet is whether we can store objects like components in a list. Has anyone tried that? No one has tried that? I'm going to give it a try and see if it works. Okay? Because if it works, that potentially gives us a lot of interesting options. So I'll give this a try. So in the designer, what I'll do is I'm going to have 3 buttons. Okay, not really exciting here. Okay, so the first button is going to say red. The second button is going to say green, RGB. And the third one is going to say blue. Okay. So now we have just 3 buttons on the screen. I should rename the button name themselves. So this is BTN red. Oops, not that red. The color red. There we go. The second one is going to be BTN green. The last one is BTN blue. There we go. All right. So the interface or the components are pretty simple. And then what we'll do is in the blocks here, I go to screen 1 and say when screen 1 is initialized, I'm going to do the following. I create a global variable. Whenever you want to create a global or local variable, you go to the variable tab here, and then I want to initialize a global variable. In this case, this one is called buttons. Okay, and I'm going to initialize it to nothing because the initialized event of the screen is actually going to do all the work. In here, I'm going to say set my global variable, global buttons, to the following. I'm going to initialize this to an array, and to make an array, you basically just make a list. And this time I have 3 items in the list. and I'm going to try something that I haven't tried before. In other words, I'm going to use components to do this. So let's see right here. So btn red, we have all the usual stuff, except for the last one here is referring to the button itself. Ooh, it allows me to do it, so I think I can actually get this done. Okay, now this is something that we have not done before. Okay, I'm selecting a component itself to become a value in a list or in an array in this case. Now we'll go ahead and take a look, why this might be useful, later on. Okay, the next one is going to be green. Okay, so once again, I drag the component itself into, the list here, and then we have blue, just like here. All right. So here we have, an array of 3 items. The first item is the red button itself, or the button with the label red, and then the button with the label green, and then the button with the label blue. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to program one button first, one button at a time. The first button is red. Okay, so when the red button is clicked, I want all 3 buttons to change their colors to red. Okay, not just this button, but all three buttons, all the buttons. Okay, all the buttons in the array called buttons. Okay, so let's see whether we can actually make this work or not. The nice thing about a list or an array in this case is you can use a special control structure called for each blah in list. Okay, this is a really handy way to do it, because it says, you don't even have to know where to start and where to finish, because this particular control structure says it will go through each and every single item in the list and do whatever you specify inside the block here. So in this case, we have our global variable. We can say get buttons. Get global buttons. And inside, we're going to switch the color of the button. Now this part is kind of interesting, because I is now one item that we are going through in the list or the array that we call buttons. So I should be a button, because I have only put components as buttons inside that particular array. Okay, so the next question is, but how do we make use of I, because there's no such thing here listed under I? Well, there is one thing here that we can use. It is this guy here. Okay, if you go to any component, we can use this little block here that basically says set the background color of a button of some component to a particular color. In this case, the component is going to be I. Okay, so we'll go to variables, get I here. Okay, and we're going to set it to the red color. So we just go to colors, plug and play the red here, and that's my that's my event handler. Now I think this is really kind of cool, because it allows you to basically say, okay, with everything that I want to change, I will just put it into a list, and then we'll just have the list. We'll just have the code here to go through everything in the list in order to get everything affected, without having to name each and every individual component. Okay. I've never tried this before. This is the first time ever to give it a try, so we'll see whether it works or not. My emulator is still up and running, so that's good, and I can now download the application first. How many people think this is going to work? I have some faith. Well, I understand how the backend code is probably generated enough that I have some pretty good. I have some confidence this is going to work. Now this is going to be helpful too. If you really want your back button to be useful, this is one of the things where it can be very helpful, because what you can do is for every change that you make to a form in a screen, you save it in a list. Okay, so every time you press the back button, you pop one thing out of the list and then you restore the state of everything according to the previous item. So that's one thing that you can do to help you implement the back button. Okay, so I'm gonna upload the code here. So adb install -r, and it's called array demo. All right. So now we go to the here. We have array demo. Okay, the initialization is good, because otherwise it would have complained at this point. I click the red button and they all turn red at the same time. Woohoo! That works.
It looks like it just removed its skin and just made a red block.
Yes, that's what it did. That's actually the same behavior in App Inventor 1. If you have tried out the one that draws something on the screen, that's exactly what's going to happen. Okay, now, what if I do something like this? Because what if I try to do something to screw it up, right? Okay, I'm going to put in something other than a button. In other words, I'm going to put a label here. And it doesn't even matter how I name the label, because in the code, I'm going to try to mess up this program. Because when I initialize buttons, I will say, hey, you know what? I'm going to include a label here, and then we'll see what happens to this program. So I'll go to label 1, and label 1 has the same thing. You can also use it as a component all by itself. So now, it would update the 3 buttons without any problems. But by the time the for each loop here gets to the last item, which is a label, then it should have a little bit of a problem there, because it doesn't know, hey, this is not a button. There's no, I cannot deal with anything other than a button, because this block, it's only supposed to work with buttons. So we'll see what kind of error message we'll get in this case. I know for sure it's going to give me some kind of an error. So we'll go ahead and see what kind of error. It will just basically say, something is not a button, and therefore we cannot change the background color.
You do have one warning down
Yeah, but that warning is just because I did not initialize the global variable with something. It has already been there since the beginning of the program. This is also a runtime error too. There's no way App Inventor can catch this one without running the program. So we'll give it a try. Place. And go back to my text prompt here. Reinstall the app. When you reinstall an app, it automatically stops the app first. All right. So we go to the emulator, start the app again. The initialization is not a problem, it's when you run it. Yep, property setter was expecting a button component, but got a label instead. That's actually pretty clear.
Instead of error code 17639.
Which is what I was expecting. I knew it would give me some kind of runtime message, but I wasn't expecting it to be this clear. So that's not bad. I mean, that's really good.
Well, I think they intended it to be that way for this
Right.
type of setting.
Yeah, but not a whole lot of people can run into this problem, because you really have to do what I just did in order to trigger something like this to happen.
Like in this case, you sort of built on it, but if
Right.
someone just said it that way, you could
Yep.
also run across it too.
Yeah, potentially, but it's unlikely that someone would not use button 1 dot set background color instead of saying button set background color and then specify the component.
Could you test it out by just taking the button and the chunk of it and putting the label component into it?
Absolutely.
Will it accept it?
That's a good idea. I think. Okay, so you mean get rid of this?
Yeah.
And
So
instead
it potentially
it'll
knows
plug in.
both types.
It'll plug. Oh, it doesn't plug this time. That's pretty smart. There's no way to get a local variable I. Just I doesn't work either. So the best I can do is to say get variable and then specify. Click here first before I is exposed. Okay. All right. So for those of you who really want to implement the back button in a proper way, because you have a form to fill in, and for every single step you want the user to have a way to kind of back up to the previous state. This is one way to do it. It's not the only way, but it certainly is one way. So basically you have a list, so we'll call this list data, okay, screen data. Okay. Screen data is a list. Now this list is kind of special because it consists of, guess what, sublists. Okay, so it has sublists like this. Okay, each sublist is going to be a list of pairs. Okay, so you basically for each type of component that you have to restore the state, you list the component first. So you basically have one for all the buttons. Okay. You have another one for all the text boxes, text. Boxes, okay, consistent. And if you have sliders, same way. Okay, so you have sliders. So anything that you want to save and restore the state, because of the back button, you want to do it like this. And within buttons, what you need to do is to basically enumerate all the buttons that you have. And then within each button, you want to save and restore both the value or the state. Buttons, I think it's just visibility, because sometimes you might want to hide some buttons. And then for text boxes, you also have to save and restore the actual text value of a text box. For sliders, the slider value, and so on. So this way, you're basically tracking everything that is displayed on the single screen at any particular moment. So when the user presses the back button, you basically just say, okay, I want to restore it to the previous one and then get rid of that item from the overall list. Okay? I think most of you kind of get the general idea. It is kind of tedious to set up, but once you set it up, then it's very easy to go back to the previous step because it's really tracking everything that you're doing. So it's just an idea for people who want to use the back button to its fullest to basically say, okay, every time we specify something, there's a way to go back to the previous state of that screen. Okay. Any other questions? Now, for those of you who don't want to deal with something that complicated and still want to do something like this, the easiest way to get around this problem is to have another global variable. So instead of having a single global variable called buttons, you can have another one called say text boxes. So this way, text boxes will have all the text boxes, or initialized to all the text boxes. So, this one here. Then you can have another mechanism to make global changes to all the text boxes. This can be helpful if you want to change the font size of something, because you can now go through all the text boxes and change all of their font to a particular font size. You don't have to name each and every single one and say, change your font size, change your font size. You just say, okay, for all the text boxes that I know, change the font size. Am I making any sense here? So it's really useful for any changes that you want to apply to a whole bunch of components. But the components, on the other hand, need to be of the same type, because otherwise, this call or this block here is not going to work. Any questions? These are definitely slightly more advanced uses of a list and also the components.
You can still do it that way. You just have to put a condition before you try to set it.
You just need a what?
A condition before you set it.
There's no way to check what a component is. I already looked into it.
Oh.
So there's no way to say is I a component? Is it a button? Is it a checkbox? Is it a text box? There's no way to check it. I already looked. If you look under any components, any button is assuming the component is a button already, and there's no way to kind of get around that one. As far as I know, there's no way to get around it.
You can create a short, you can create another sublist and only
Right, so you need to track it. There's no way to test it on the fly and say, oh, you are a button, I'm gonna divert the logic over here. Oh, you are a label, I'm gonna divert the logic over here, which that would be very handy, but it doesn't have that feature. All right, so any other questions about all the, yep.
How do you expand the block to make additional sockets?
How do you expand a block?
To make additional sockets.
Oh, okay, that's pretty easy. You click the plus sign here,
Okay.
and then you drag another item over here, then it has opened another socket. If you want to remove that, you just drag the item back onto the other side, and now it has one fewer sockets. This is also a feature in App Inventor 2. App Inventor 1 does not have this ability to do it. Also another reason why I prefer App Inventor 2 to App Inventor 1, just because the design, the user interaction engine is a lot better.
How would you do this with App Inventor 1?
With App Inventor 1, the moment you drag something in to make a list, it will create a new empty socket. So there's always a new empty socket.
Well, how do you add one after you've built the empty socket?
It will automatically.
There's always another empty socket.
It automatically creates one. So
Finally.
Yeah, App Inventor 1 will automatically create a new empty socket. So when you drag something in to make a list, it always creates one more socket available. Make it one more available. All right. So any other questions? Questions? All right. Well, it's almost time, so I'm gonna let you guys go to focus on your project and try to think about how to incorporate all the required features into your project. I think most of you already kind of include more than what I'm asking for, which is fine. So the lab session now becomes kind of like I'm going to change my role, to a consultant instead. So whatever project you want to do, you can ask me questions, and I will, try my best to help you implement whatever you want to implement in your app. All right. And also for that purpose, I think I'm going to have to use a list to kind of track my, who's next in line. All right. So I'm going to stop the recording and send it up. Send it to YouTube.